Some of you listening might be well into your second or third week of school, while others of you may be clinging desperately to your last few weeks of summer. I always find that August is such a funny time here at It's Not Rocket Science because half of you all that I'm talking with are on a similar school schedule to my oldest child. You have been back forever in school. You are totally in back to school mode, while others of you seem to be on similar school schedules to my younger two children, who are experiencing what we like to call August endless summer, if you will, because they don't go back to school until after Labor Day. And you might be in a similar situation of experiencing this endless summer. So either way, I always try to do my best during this month to serve all of you, regardless of where you are, just to make sure that you feel prepared as the new school year starts and kicks off for you, whether that's already happened or is upcoming. So today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my top 5 favorite teacher hacks, if you will, that I just absolutely think would simplify your life as a secondary science teacher this school year. And I just can't wait to get into these with you. So if you are ready for it, let's get right in. This is Secondary Science Simplified, a podcast for secondary science teachers who want to engage their students and simplify their lives. I'm Rebecca Joyner from It's Not Rocket Science. As a high school science teacher turned curriculum writer, I am passionate about helping other science teachers love their jobs, serve their students, and do it all in only 40 hours a week. Are you ready to rock the time you spend in your classroom and actually have a life outside of it? You are in the right place, teacher friend. Let's get to today's episode. Okay, so when I say the word hack, these tend to be things that are like little tricks of the trade that like you've learned that maybe not everyone's doing. And so some of these, for those of you who have been like longtime Secondary Science Simplified listeners, some of these are not going to seem like hacks to you because you've heard me talk about them so much. But these are hacks. And I'm always surprised when I share some of these things that people are still like, I've never heard that, because I feel like it's all I talk about. So I'm going to share these hacks. All 5 of these things I chose, I really wanted to be intentional about choosing things that are really simple so that hopefully they're really easy to implement for you this school year and add on. Even if you've already started your school year, you can add in all of these things really easily. Okay, so hack number 1 has to be prime times. Like I could not have this podcast if it wasn't about prime times. Y'all know who have been on my corner of the internet for a while. I'm obsessed with prime times. So prime times are my silly trademarked, because I'm crazy, name for basically the first 5 minutes of your class period. I think that that's the most important time of your class period. And so I call that time your prime time. And prime times are my bell ringers. And this, y'all, is such a procedural game changer. It has such a huge impact on my ability to manage a classroom. It's the cornerstone of my entire assessment strategy. And it's a relational game changer. It impacts everything. Like when I think back to, I spent my summer re-recording all of my virtual professional development content because if you've been around for a while, again, you know, before there was this podcast, I had a virtual professional development course called Secondary Science Simplified. I ran it 2 different summers. It was it was pre-recorded content, but it was more like a live cohort who took it. We all worked through the content together over the course of 8 weeks. We had a Facebook group. We had live coaching calls. It was something you like signed up and were a part of. But what I found is it was a little bit limiting in terms of who could do it because it just didn't work in people's schedules sometimes to be able to do it all at once. And it was hard for my family for me to have something so labor intensive in the time of year when I have the least amount of childcare and support, which is the summer. And so I decided to spend this summer totally revamping it so that it would kind of match the format of my It's Not Rocket Science curricula, where there are essentially like units, which are mini courses. And then there's a bundle, which is all of them together at a discount. You can buy just the mini course or the individual unit. And if you like it, get the bundle and get refunded. Like it just gives you more flexibility, and there's no live component anymore. So there isn't a Facebook group. There's no live coaching calls, but at the same time, the price point is able to be cheaper because of that, and the accessibility of you being able to purchase and take it whenever you need. So I'm telling you all that because literally some of my units there's 7 units in the total bundle, and 4 of them are majorly impacted by prime times. The culture unit, lessons, relationships, and assessments. Like that is how much it is integrated in everything I do. So here's why it's a procedural game changer, and it's going to impact your culture and your classroom management. When you have such a structured first 5 minutes of your class period, your students feel safe in your classroom. They know that when they walk in, they know exactly what's expected of them, and they know exactly how to deliver in terms of that expectation. Our students live in constant chaos, and if we can create classroom spaces where they feel safe, that is where they're going to be able to learn. And safety often looks like a lack of chaos and a clear expectations. And having the prime time is just such a nice rhythm and routine. It just starts things off so smoothly. It's just like I think about with my toddlers at home. We have a very specific morning routine. It makes it so we don't start off the day with everyone crying and Cheerios and spilled milk all over the floor. We have a very smooth time because the very beginning really matters. And again, how that first interaction with my toddlers go, it sets the pace for how it's going to go until we get to school. And that's the same with your students. The first 5 minutes will set the rest of the tone for your 50 minutes or the 90 minutes you have with them. So it's a procedural game changer because you train your students in this. They get used to walking in, sitting down, getting a pencil out, and immediately getting started on this. It's so nice. Your bell rings and you're not settling anyone down because you can train your students to be quiet and working on the prime time. You get that 5 minutes of peace to transition your materials from one class to another, take your attendance, walk around and check in with any students you need to. I'm obsessed with it from a procedural standpoint. And as someone who is a self-proclaimed outgoing introvert, I am very outgoing. I can be very social, but I am definitely an introvert. I recharge from being alone, and I can get very overstimulated by noise, which is something that has been very apparent since having small children. And so having that 5 minutes of quiet is truly like taking my soul and plugging it into a battery and recharging me so I'm ready to be social and outgoing and peppy and optimistic for the rest of the class period. Like I need that. So I love a prime time for setting that kind of procedure. Now, how does it impact my assessment strategy? Doing the prime time is something that I do. I give them this bell ringer. It's 5 minutes. It's enough. It's usually 3 to 5 questions, but it's always short enough that they can answer it within 5 minutes. I collect it. We immediately go over it and talk about it. And then I grade it every single day and give it back to them. I don't tally the score until the end of the week to put into the grade book. But because I'm grading it every single day, I don't have to collect and grade anything else the rest of the class period if I don't want to, because I am getting grades from students every single day. I am checking in with them. Doing the prime time and committing to this one small 5-minute thing, this one small investment of time, frees me up to not have to constantly collect stuff and grade it. Now, I have so many things to say about assessment and my entire grading policy and how I think you should set up your grade book and all of that. That's why I have an entire virtual PD course on assessments. But I couldn't do what I do with assessments and be so ruthless about how little I collect and grade for accuracy if I wasn't doing this prime time every day and collecting and grading it for accuracy. So that's a game changer. Also, it's a relationship game changer because I know that I will be checking in with each student at least 2 to 3 times every single class period. And here's how I'm able to do that. One, it's by waiting for them at the door when they come in. As soon as the bell rings at the end of first period, I immediately shoo the people out of my room and I pass back the second period's prime times from the previous day. I put them face down on their desk. I collect them in order so it's really easy to return them to them because they use the same sheet of paper for the whole week. Then that takes me 20 to 30 seconds. Then I'm at the front door and I'm able to greet every student as they walk in. And I know that they are ready to get started doing their prime time. I don't need to be in the classroom getting them started. They know what to do. So I get that initial touch point at the door. I get the second touch point by grading their prime time. I like to try to find pockets of time during the class period to grade mine so that I can immediately see like who is struggling with what. Okay. So like if we're doing, gas laws and chemistry and I do their prime time and it's 2 different gas law, like quantitative problems, and I go through those and grade them really quickly, I can see like, oh, these 4 students totally bombed it. They didn't even know what gas law we were talking about, let alone solve the problem. So I know those are the 4 students I need to check in with, whether that's during class and just be like, hey, How do you feel now that we've gone over the prime time? Do you understand it better? Do you want to come in for lunch for tutoring? Can you stay after today? Like, I get in with them ASAP. I think giving them as immediate feedback as possible whenever I'm grading anything is so helpful for them. And so that's my second touch point with them relationally, is even if it's not to their face, I'm at least seeing something that the students did work-wise every single day with my eyeballs, and I'm grading it for accuracy, not just completion. And then my third touch point is I keep all of this is like hack 1.5. I have all of my students' names written down on popsicle sticks, and I keep them in bags for each class period. And I go through those at least once every single class period. And so that's my third touch point, is I know that I'm going to call on every single student once. And they know too, like if I ask them a question and they say, I don't know, or they don't have the answer to it, I throw their name back in the baggie and I'm going to get to them by the end of class. And typically my shy students, especially, they really like to try to answer the questions because they know at the end of class, if I haven't gotten through all of the popsicle sticks, when we have like 3 to 5 minutes left at the end of class, I will just call everyone's attention to me and I'll just draw the last few sticks and I'll be like, okay, JC, tell me something good. Or, Camden, any news of interest? And I'll make them, share something a bit more personal. And a lot of them don't like to do that. So that's my 3 touch points: at the door, through the popsicle stick, I'm talking to them, and the prime time. That's such a relationship game changer to make sure that you're talking to every single student multiple times, every single class period. And then it also really impacts my lessons as a whole too, because I use this. This is a formative assessment. I'm using it to inform myself if my teaching practice and what I'm doing is getting through to these students. I let mine always be open note. I let them use any resources that they have or that we've done, because the key here to me is not that they have mastery, but it's that they're like working where I'm assessing where they are in the learning process to make sure we're making progress here. And I can do these prime times and we can go over it as a class. And I can see just from our conversation as a class going over it, like, oh, wow, we're all very confused, or only 1 or 2 people are chiming in here. And I can immediately make a change to my lessons that day. I can be like, time out. Let's go over this stuff for like 10 more minutes that we talked about yesterday before we move on. And so it truly impacts everything. It impacts how I manage my classroom, my relationships with my students, how it informs my lesson plans. And like I said, it allows me to majorly hack how much I'm grading by making sure that this is the one thing I'm doing every single day so I can decrease the amount of other stuff that I'm grading. I'm obsessed with prime times. I have an entire other podcast episode about this. And a couple blog posts I'll link in the show notes so you can hear more about those, especially because I don't want to keep gabbing for those of you who have heard me talk about this for how many years? 9 years I've been doing It's Not Rocket Science. So it's been a lot. So I'm going to stop now, but that's my first number 1 hack, prime times. And if you're like, I just don't have time to make them. Okay, here's what you do. You put in 5 minutes per prep you have a day this year to write your prime times. At the end of the day, you go ahead and you make your prime time for the next day. You have it ready. By the end of this year, you have a whole set. If you don't want to do that, you buy someone else's, because there's a gajillion on the internet. I have prime times for the year for biology, chemistry, anatomy, and physical science. I'll link those in the show notes. You can grab those and edit them and tweak them and do whatever you want. But I am obsessed. My second hack for you is board points. I love board points. This is a teaching strategy I learned from a co-teacher my first year teaching. Obsessed. So I truly believe when it comes to classroom management that individual behavior issues are dealt with on a relational level with students, like a one-to-one relationship level. That's how we deal with those. I believe that whole classroom management issues are dealt with on a procedural level. So we identify pain points, we create procedures to prevent those pain points, and then we proactively teach them to students and consistently reinforce them so that they become second nature and you don't have to be reactive in situations. When a situation happens where students disobey or they get rowdy or they're not following the systems and procedures you've put in place, you can just be super calm and reiterate the expectation, which is the procedure you've already taught, reiterate the consequence for not following the procedure, and move forward from there, not emotionally. And it doesn't become this whole explosive thing. And that's that's like the framework for how I make all my decisions for the culture of my classroom. But board points is a great solution for when you have a whole chunk of students that are disrespectful or rowdy or just a lot, or heaven forbid an entire class. Board points is for when you have one of those classes where you turn your back and it's immediately like there's no silence when you turn your back. They're all chattering. They're all off topic, or a large percentage of them are, and you turn back around and they stop. So you never can identify who's the ringleader here. You can't deal with that individual person because you don't know, because it's a bigger issue. So you use board points. Essentially what board points are is exactly what it sounds like. It's points for each class that you keep track of on your whiteboard. I keep them in the top right corner. I have each class period that I teach numbered, and then next to them at the start of a unit, they all start with 5 board points. This also creates a little bit of competitiveness between the class periods because they can see what each class has. But essentially what I will do is anytime I can't get my class to settle down, or I feel like a large group is being disrespectful, or let's say we're in lab and I train my students that when I ding my little bell up front, they stop what they're doing and look at me. If I have to ding it more than 1 or 2 times, then I dock a board point. And then normally a couple students will notice and they'll start hushing each other and make themselves stop. And they kind of start to self-manage. But essentially they all start with 5 points at the beginning of the unit. You dock points for poor group behavior, and you can add points on for excellent or above average group behavior. You can also use this with subs. So I always said, hey, if I get a bad report from a sub, I don't care what they say, y'all are automatically going down to 0. And if I get a great report from a sub, I will pull you back to 5. Also, for those classes that are just easy, that are always at a 5, if you want, you can even go above 5 here and there, go up to a 6 or 7, but don't feel that pressure. There's a lot of flexibility here for how you do this for your students. And then you're thinking, what's the reward? What's the point? So the reward is on test day, I always have a bonus question, and it will be worth however many board points it is that the students have. Now, if they have 0 board points, then it becomes a required question on the test. So this isn't just like a complete freebie of a question. It's still related to the test. So they don't want to have an extra question count for something, but it also does need to be easy enough that they want the board points because they know they can get the bonus question. And if you're not allowed to give bonus points, one thing you can do too is instead of letting them get 105, if they get the board points on the test and they had a perfect test score, you can just let them get up to 100. So if they had a 94 on the test, they can get a 99. If they have a 97 on the test, they can't get a 102, but they can get back up to 100. You can kind of work with it there. If your students aren't motivated by bonus points on a test, you can say, hey, if by the end of the unit you have 5 board points, then you guys earn, a Starbucks day where you get to have coffee and have a catch-up day in class where you work on stuff. Or if you have 5 points, I will bring in donuts. Or you can figure out ways to what the reward will be that'll motivate them. But the key is that it's this visual classroom management board point, and everyone can see, and the peer pressure is real. They will see other classes do better and worse, and they will want to deliver. It's so easy to manage and keep up with. And then at the end of the unit, you restart. So that's really encouraging too for those rowdier classes that feel like they can't get ahead. You get to hit the reset button at the start of each new unit. I love board points. It's so simple, so easy. My third hack is not going to seem like a hack either, but I promise you it is. And it is proactivity with parents. Y'all, parents are an asset. They are not an obstacle. So you need to start seeing those parents and guardians of your students not as just another part of this job that I have to deal with to check off the box, but a useful tool that you can use to see success and change behavior in your students. My number one recommendation to be proactive with parents is so important for the timeliness of the beginning of the year. And that is at the very first sign of a conflict, before it's even truly become a conflict, you reach out to the parent ASAP and get on their radar. I have found that many teachers are like me, and they avoid parents until the last possible moment. And then at that point, something has become such a big problem with the student, whether it be their grade or their behavior, that by the time you're reaching out to the parent, it almost feels so big that the parent is so angry that they haven't heard about this any sooner. Whereas if you reach out to them first thing, it's completely non-emotional and it feels like not a big deal. This can be as simple as a phone call or an email, just saying, hey, I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Rebecca Joyner. I'm your son's honors biology teacher. I just want to reach out and let you know we had a little bit of a issue today with disrespect. I feel like we handled it, but I just want to make sure you were aware because I want to nip this in the bud so this isn't a continual problem throughout the school year, and just make sure that we are good, your son is good, that we're all on the same page, that this is how we're going to treat each other or speak to each other in our class. Or maybe you're reaching out and saying, hey, I just want to reach out about your daughter, like we had our very first big assignment to turn in that was going to be collected. She did not turn it in until 2 or 3 days later. I just want to make sure you are aware so that this does not become this, tardiness of assignments does not become a habit, because that will really impact her grade in the long term. I just want to get ahead of it. That's the kind of stuff we want to tell these parents. We're just going to get ahead of this. We're going to keep it casual. It's not a big deal. Then if it becomes more serious and it becomes more of a reoccurring issue, you can reach out to those parents. It's not the first time they've heard from you, and it takes the sting off. Now, bonus points for this hack if you're willing to meet with them face to face. I know you might think I'm crazy, but I make it a goal to meet with every single parent that I can face to face, especially for my AP class, within the first month or 2 of school. It's easy if you have like a back to school night to meet with some of those parents, but I love a parent conference. I think if you can get that FaceTime with parents, they will treat you so differently the rest of the school year in terms of their emails, your phone calls, any sort of communication you have with them, because they're now seeing the person on the other side of the computer or the other side of the phone call. Whereas you are a nothing to them. And I think, unfortunately, we are in a society that's trained to think it's okay to act any type of way and have zero courtesy on the internet to any other people because it feels like a computer, not a person. So I like the face-to-face time to remind them that I am a person and they're a person and their student is a person. And I just want to all be on the same team. So I highly recommend proactivity with parents. My 4th hack for you is having a desk calendar. So I have one linked in the show notes that I use. I get this every year at the start of the school year, but you can just search like at a glance or monthly desk calendar. But all this is it's essentially a flat calendar of the full month that you put on your desk, and then you can put your laptop and stuff like that on top of it. But the reason I love it is because I assign a different color for each prep I have of like pen that I use. And then I stagger and plan out when I will have labs due and projects and tests and when they're going to be assigned by unit. So as I'm designing my units, I'm looking at my calendar and I'm mapping these out so that I make sure that I don't have more than one lab to prep on the same day. Because if you are in a space like I was, I had nowhere to store labs and I had no time to prep labs, let alone prep more than one lab a day. So I used my desk calendar to stagger when the labs would be and then also when due dates would be. So I wasn't collecting a project from one class, a lab from another, and tests from 2 others on the same day and thinking I was going to get through grading all of those in 24 hours. I like to get everything back within 24 hours of collecting it or just the next time I see the students. And by staggering when I'm assigning these things, it helps you not get a backlog. And having the visual is so nice if you put it all on that desk calendar. And then y'all, it feels so good at the end of the month just to rip off the month and start fresh with the new one. So I highly recommend that. You might be wondering how this is even possible. You do have to batch lesson plan, which is something I'm really passionate about. I talk about it in my lessons virtual PD course, which is linked in the show notes, but I'm obsessed with this. Get a desk calendar. I absolutely love it. Okay, I've debated on what my 5th hack should be, honestly. I feel like I needed 5, but I could have like 20, but I don't want this episode to get too much longer. Honestly, I've debated between 2. So I'm going to try to like tie these in together, even though they're not necessarily tied together. But my last hack, I should say, is going to be 5th and final hack is paper over tech. Okay. And I know this may seem like the opposite of a hack because some of you are so tech savvy and you can make stuff so fast on tech and grade it so fast and all of that. But y'all, I just think it's too much. I think our students' brains are so oversaturated with technology. They're so overstimulated by it. I just think we need to slow down and do things a little bit more old school. Like, what if you tried this year, like going back to your roots and just doing things a lot more simply by doing things on paper? I also think too, there is a true neurological learning connection between brain and hand and having physical connection to doing things. I also think it's a good practice for me to slow down and not rush my students. And I think I can rush them when I'm doing things with tech versus on paper. And then I also think that we're more prone, and this is where I'm going to tie in the other hack I thought of adding in, but we're going to make it one. The other hack is you need to grade way less. And I think when we are grading a lot of things on tech, we're more prone to collect more things because it's all on tech. So we're like, oh, I'm not actually collecting that much stuff. When in reality you are. But when you are collecting things on paper, it's such an obvious visual signal of how much you're collecting that it can hopefully help you stop collecting so much because you're going to have a physical reminder of how much you still have to grade. And I think sometimes when we do tech, it gets lost in the abyss. Again, so I think my final hack, which is paper over tech, I think it's a benefit to students to really slow down and decrease the stimulation and give them that brain to hand connection, which I think is so important, especially for our quantitative sciences. They can show their work and all of that so much better if they're writing it out. And then I also think paper over tech is a gift to you too, because it's going to be a visual hack and reminder that you need to grade less stuff. Because that's another thing I really want for you this school year. And I have a whole podcast about this, grading less. I'll link that in the show notes as well, so you can check that out. Okay, so those are my 5 hacks for the new school year, my top 5. Using prime times, board points, being proactive with parents, having that desk calendar for staggering out assignments and lab prep, and then using paper over tech. I hope you find these helpful. And if there's one that you're really excited about, let me know. Leave a review today for the podcast. Let me know which one you're most excited to implement this school year, and I'll be so excited to hear from you. And if you want to grab any of those links I mentioned in this episode, there's a lot of them, I know. You can find them in the show notes, which are at itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/episode 143. All right, teacher friends, that wraps up today's episode. If you're looking for an easy way to start simplifying your life as a secondary science teacher, head to itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/challenge to grab your classroom reset challenge. And guess what? It's totally free. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you here next week. Until then, I'll be rooting for you, teacher friend.